You know what most people find when they Google Malaysia's airport? Pictures of planes surrounded by dense jungle. And their first thought is always the same. Did they seriously build an airport in the middle of a forest? The answer is yes. But the reason why will completely change how you think about modern aviation. If you're listening right now, I need your help with something. My friend from down south said Malaysian content would never hit even 1,000 views because nobody cares about infrastructure stories. But I think we Malaysians appreciate the genius behind our own backyard more than anyone gives us credit for. Tap that subscribe button and let's prove him spectacularly wrong. Assalamu alaikum. So here's what actually happened. When planners sat down in the early 1990s to design what would become KLIA, they faced an impossible choice. Build it close to Kuala Lumpur, where land was scarce and expensive, or build it far away where nobody wanted to travel. They chose option 3. They found a massive plot of land in Sepang, looked at the rainforest covering every inch of it, and said, "We're building here anyway. But we're keeping the trees." This wasn't some environmental PR stunt. This was calculated strategy. And it's working better than anyone predicted. Let me take you back to 1993. Malaysia was experiencing explosive economic growth. The old Sepang airport was bursting at the seams, handling way more passengers than it was designed for. Something had to be done. Fast. The government allocated 100 square kilometers in Sepang. That's roughly the size of Paris. And almost all of it was covered in tropical rainforest. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most countries would have cleared everything. Flatten the land, start fresh, build efficiently. That's what happened with airports in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Bangkok. Clean slate construction. But Malaysia's planners noticed something. The forest wasn't just trees. It was a natural climate control system. Think about the last time you walked from an air-conditioned mall into the open-air parking lot in Malaysia. That wall of heat that hits you? That's what airports deal with every single day. Except airports are massive heat islands. All that concrete and asphalt absorbs solar radiation and radiates it back. Aircraft engines add even more heat. The result is an artificial heat bubble that makes everything less efficient. Kuala Lumpur International Airport kept approximately 25% of the original forest. Strategic patches of jungle were preserved around the runways, between terminals, and along the perimeter. These aren't decorative gardens. They're functional infrastructure. The trees do something remarkable. They reduce ambient temperature around the airport by up to 5 degrees Celsius compared to fully cleared airports. 5 degrees might not sound like much until you realize what that means for operations. Aircraft engines perform better in cooler air. Air conditioning systems in terminals don't have to work as hard. Fuel efficiency improves. Maintenance intervals extend. Everything costs less to run. But wait, there's something even more brilliant hidden in plain sight. Rainwater management. Malaysia gets around 2,500 millimeters of rain annually. That's more than double what London gets. At most airports, all that water becomes a problem. It floods runways, overwhelms drainage systems, and has to be pumped away at enormous cost. KLIA's forest acts like a massive natural sponge. The trees and soil absorb rainfall, release it slowly, and filter it naturally. The airport rarely floods despite being in one of the wettest regions on Earth. Engineers calculated that replicating this function with artificial drainage systems would have cost an additional 500 million ringgit. The forest does it for free. Forever. And here's the part that really blows my mind. The forest is actually expanding. When KLIA first opened in 1998, they started a reforestation program. Native species like Meranti, mahogany, and rain trees were planted in designated zones. Today, the airport has more green cover than it did on opening day. It's one of the only airports in the world that can make that claim. You're probably wondering about the obvious concern. Don't forests attract wildlife? Won't birds strike aircraft? Valid question. This was the #1 objection during planning. Critics said putting an airport in a jungle was asking for disaster. Bird strikes are serious business. A single incident can ground a plane and cost millions. Here's what the planners understood that critics didn't. Malaysian rainforests have a specific ecosystem structure. The canopy trees grow tall, creating a high-altitude layer where birds fly. Below that is the understory where smaller animals live. The airport runways and approach paths were positioned to avoid cutting through primary bird flight corridors. The forest was managed to discourage ground-feeding birds that pose the highest strike risk. The result? KLIA has one of the lowest bird strike rates among major Southeast Asian airports. Lower than Changi. Lower than Suvarnabhumi. Lower than NAIA. The forest actually helps because it provides alternative habitat away from flight paths. Birds don't need to cross the runways to find food or nesting sites. But perhaps the most underrated benefit is something you'd never think about sitting in the departure lounge. Noise. Jet engines are incredibly loud. Residents near airports suffer from constant noise pollution. Property values drop. Health issues emerge. Lawsuits happen. KLIA's forest acts as a natural sound barrier. The trees absorb and deflect sound waves. Communities in Sepang report significantly lower noise levels compared to what residents near Sepang Airport experienced. This matters economically. Less noise means less compensation paid to affected residents. It means fewer restrictions on nighttime flights. It means the airport can expand without triggering public backlash. The forest bought the airport's social license to grow. And grow it has. When KLIA opened, it handled 25 million passengers annually. Today it handles over 60 million across both terminals. The forest never became an obstacle to expansion. Instead, it became part of the brand identity. You know how Singapore promotes their jewel Changi with its indoor waterfall? Malaysia promotes its forest airport. It's instantly recognizable. It's uniquely Malaysian. There's an economic dimension most people miss entirely. The forest provides ecosystem services valued at approximately 50 million ringgit annually. Carbon sequestration alone is worth millions. The trees absorb CO2 from aircraft emissions. They produce oxygen. They support biodiversity. These aren't just nice environmental extras. They translate directly into sustainability credits that help the airport meet international environmental standards without purchasing expensive carbon offsets. Major airlines now prioritize environmentally certified airports. They want to show shareholders and customers they're taking climate seriously. KLIA's forest gives it a competitive advantage in attracting new routes and airline partnerships. Emirates, Qatar Airways, and other major carriers specifically mention KLIA's environmental initiatives in their sustainability. Let me paint you a specific picture of how this works in practice. Remember the last time you landed at KLIA? When you're on approach, you look down and see this patchwork of green and gray. Runways cutting through jungle. Terminals nestled between trees. It looks almost impossible. Like someone carefully threaded modern infrastructure through ancient forest without destroying either one. That's exactly what happened. And it required engineering precision that most people never appreciate. The runway foundations had to be designed to avoid disturbing root systems of nearby trees. Drainage had to account for natural water flow patterns. Even the runway lighting was positioned to minimize light pollution affecting nocturnal wildlife. Construction took 6 years. Compare that to Hong Kong's airport, which took 7 years but required creating an entire artificial island. Or Denver International, which took 5 years on completely flat, clear prairie. Building in a forest is objectively harder. But the long-term benefits justified the extra complexity. Here's something that really drives this home. Operating costs. KLIA spends roughly 30% less on cooling and climate control than comparable airports in the region. That's tens of millions of ringgit saved every single year. The forest pays for itself many times over just in energy savings alone. And there's one more twist to this story that brings everything full circle. Remember how I said the forest was seen as an obstacle during planning? Some officials wanted to clear it completely. They argued it would be faster, cheaper, and easier. The decision to keep it came down to one person making a crucial argument. The forest wasn't the problem. It was the solution. That shift in perspective changed everything. Instead of asking, how do we get rid of this forest to build an airport, they asked, how do we build an airport that works with this forest? Completely different question. Completely different outcome. Today, when aviation experts study sustainable airport design, KLIA is a case study. Architecture students visit to understand how infrastructure can coexist with nature. Environmental engineers study its water management system. Airlines analyze its operational efficiency. All because someone decided to keep the trees. And for us Malaysians who use this airport regularly, maybe we've become immune to how special it actually is. We walk through KLIA, we see the green outside the windows, and we think that's just normal. But it's not. Most airports are concrete wastelands. KLIA is a forest that happens to have runways. That difference matters more than you might think. It matters for the environment, obviously. But it also matters for our economy, our international reputation, and our ability to grow aviation capacity sustainably. The forest isn't decoration. It's infrastructure that just happens to be alive. So next time you're waiting for your flight at KLIA, look outside. Those aren't just trees. They're cooling systems, water filters, sound barriers, carbon sinks, and wildlife habitat all working simultaneously. They're the reason your air conditioning feels comfortable, the reason flooding doesn't shut down the airport during monsoon season, and the reason KLIA can expand without destroying the surrounding environment. Malaysia built an airport in a forest because building anywhere else would have been the expensive option. Keeping the trees was the smart play. And decades later, it's still paying dividends that architects in 1993 probably never fully predicted. If this changed how you see KLIA, hit that like button. Subscribe because we're diving into more Malaysian engineering stories that deserve way more attention than they get. Drop a comment telling me which Malaysian infrastructure project you want explained next. I'm thinking Petronas Towers, but I'll let you decide. Malaysia didn't just build an airport in a forest. We built a forest that happens to be an airport. And that makes all the